parental relationships is on the lack thereof part. You know, my father also was not in my life, and my mom pretty much did everything for me. And so this has skewed my expectations of relationships, I say romantically and non-romantically. And I'd say just from friendships, you know, not having my father in the home, I found as I grew up, something that I lacked greatly was literally validation, you know, knowing.
All right, so the next question is, in what ways do you think your parental relationships or lack thereof skewed your expectations of relationships in both romantic and non-romantic relationships?
I'm gonna jump in on this one first real quick. Mine's gonna be, I'm trying to make it fast, but I get long-winded, so bear with me. So what I noticed in myself at a very young age was my father wasn't around. My mother was there. She was doing the best she could, you know, single woman, working, raising two sons, all that. What I realized in myself was, for some reason, I was reaching out and trying to find a relationship with a female from a very young age. And I don't mean just like relationship, let's get freaky. I mean like a relationship, straight up wanting a relationship from like being very young. I remember being when I say very young, like maybe 10, 11 years old, having dreams about like having a girlfriend and being at the mall and sitting up looking for clothes and all this type of stuff. I mean, it was wild stuff. So anyway, fast forward, moving into, you know, early adulthood, go ahead and become a Marine, this, that, and the third. Settle into my finances at that point and everything else. And I'm like, I'm ready to be married. Like, all right, so we go ahead, find a woman. She's about that life. I'm about that life. Go ahead, get married, everything else. For some reason, I know that I realized later in life, for some reason, I felt like I wanted to get into a relationship with a woman and have that relationship be the most successful thing ever. For some reason, just to prove to myself, in looking at my mother and my father and everything that happened with them, being divorced, breaking up, all that stuff, whatever, being broken up, all that stuff, and him not being in my life, that I could make it better, or I could do it better than they could, you know, or I could do it different and do it in a better way where everything worked out, whatever. Obviously divorced first time at this point and all this stuff, whatever. But all these thoughts and all these revelations came truthfully after getting divorced and really kind of just looking back at my life and saying, okay, what got me to this point? So I can make sure that I do the healing that's necessary before I step into another one of these. And that's one of the things that I really realized, that looking at the relationship that my father and my mother held, I looked at that and I said, I could do it better. So that's what I wanted to do. And that's where I push myself relationship wise. As it deals with like relationships with females, I don't know, I'm probably just probably the norm as it deals with most men. You have some females that you have on this side that are literally, this isn't going to be a relationship. We're just totally completely doing stuff. You have females that are in this area where it's like, you know what, this could potentially be something. And then you go ahead and you work through life in those ways. You get into a relationship, you try and do the best that you can. You know, try and be the best man that you can, try and be chivalrous, but try and be, you know, whatever as it deals with all of that. But all of that learning came from that, for me, came from that one instance that I realized of having that thought process. I want to do it better than they did, you know, because obviously they messed something up. So I should be able to get this right. which is just interesting topic.
I'd like to jump in really quickly here. This is actually the question when I read it. I said, I'm going to be pretty engaged on this one. And I think just kind of similar to Shannon, the way that the question is formed, for me, the parental relationships is on the lack thereof part. My father also was not in my life, and my mom pretty much did everything for me. And so this has skewed my expectations of relationships, I say romantically and non-romantically. And I'd say just from friendships, not having my father in the home, I found as I grew up, something that I lacked greatly was literally validation, knowing as a man, am I doing what a man would do? Am I doing enough as a man? Regardless of what accomplishments I had, regardless of what people would tell me, not having that rite of passage from my father is giving me a skewed expectation when I step into a romantic relationship or even meet a new man on exactly how I'm to be. I'm always wondering, always questioning whether I'm satisfying what a man should satisfy in either of these aspects, and it gets pretty deep. And I've been able to navigate through this. And, I read a lot of books, regarding this topic, and it continues to just circle around. And I'll find that I'll meet men and I'll take a piece of them and make it a part of myself, meet another man, take a piece of it and make it a part of myself. And just to identify, is this it? And interestingly enough, because I was raised by my mother and I had 4 sisters, the only boy, I'm very comfortable with women. But when I get around men, I'm comfortable with men, right? I play football, I play sports. I know how to do the whole man thing, but there's still this question of like, man, is this how we're supposed to do this? Is this what I should be expecting from them? And should I be putting this on them or, should I be taking this from them? And so it just kind of gets into a spinning wheel. And so for me, it's the lack thereof of a father being in the home for me and not knowing how to navigate those relationships because I don't have an example, right? I meet, maybe 17 different men and I see 17 different ways to be and always questioning which one is it, right? And now I'm just a melting pot and hopefully it's satisfying, but it's constantly an open point.
Can I jump in on that one? Oh, Marcus, go ahead, brother.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
No, just to piggyback on what Denzel said about the lack thereof, my father wasn't one that said to me, I love you. I'm 40, I'll be 47 next week. And just about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, my father told me that he loved me for the first time. So he never complimented me, son, you're handsome, helped me to put a tie on, said, I love you to me. So I grew older and not knowing how to say I love you to another man, how to compliment another man and know that that's okay. You're not gay if you tell a man that he looks good, or tell him that you love him or give him a hug for that matter. So that was toxic as well, I believe, because I believe that men, there's a scripture in the Bible that talks about iron sharpens iron, us as men. And I can talk to many women. I was raised by a lot of women. And women are very compassionate. They're very loving, caring. They'll give you a hug. And they'll try to the best of their ability to understand what I'm going through as a boy, as a man, and try to encourage me. But I need another man to talk to me. I need another man to hear my voice, to hear my struggle. And who better to relate to me, my issues, my struggle than another man who's going through what I'm going through, So I try to offer to my children now a voice. In that is a lot of growth for me, not talking to them in anger, not if I feel disrespected, not getting upset. And God is really working me on that. And God has done a great job with that. But I want to talk to my children the opposite of how my father spoke to me. I want to love them opposite of how my father loved me. And just again, what Denzel was saying about the lack thereof, I would say it's like 911 emergency in this world for men to really step up and be a father to the fatherless, regardless if you have a child or not. And Marcus said he doesn't have a kid right now. Regardless if you're a father or not, you are still a big brother to someone. You still can be a father to someone. And people are very hungry and thirsty for that. But it's just really, 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 men have to learn how to communicate with each other, and for any man that did not have that example in their household, I would always point them to God. I would point them to Jesus, because for me personally, there's a scripture, 2 Corinthians 14 and 12 and 9, and it talks about God's grace, his love being sufficient for us, you know, and where our fathers in this case here may have fallen short, where our mothers have fallen short, God will fill those voids. And sounds kind of crazy, you know, but I believe it. You know, when we turn to God first very humbly and ask God to help us, you know, when we get on our knees and repent, and Lord, I'm in pain, I'm hurting. And when it's coming from a sincere, genuine heart, God knows that. And I believe that God always has someone in line to place in your pathway that will help you, speak to you, and give you the thing that, you know, you're missing. So that's all. Mm-hmm.
I love that. So on this subject, like this conversation resonates heavily with me because similar to Denzel, right? Like my father wasn't present during my developmental years into manhood. So like pre-teens into teens, because he was extremely toxic, physically, mentally abusive. I watched him physically fight my mother growing up. He was an alcoholic, and he instilled these traits. And in my mind, all I was like is, I'll never be you. So your toxicity also penetrated, and like Mike mentioned, was poisonous to me. Like I was fighting so hard not to be him that I didn't know how to be me. And I tried taking pieces of coaches and teachers and what I saw, because as a young kid, like I've watched people, my mom was like, yo, you didn't even speak till you were like 3. And she's like, then one day you started saying things about family and the men around us. And I was like, dang, this boy's been taking it in. And I started to realize that I couldn't even connect with pastors at my church, because I see you, but I also see you when I go to the bathroom kissing on somebody who's not the first lady. So why would I listen to you? And I'm taking all these things in. And I just felt like, honestly, I'm not going to lie to y'all, like at 38, I now look at life and I'm like, yo, I'm the ugly duckling. Like I'm a late bloomer. I'm so late in the process because I never had a blueprint. Because what I saw early was so toxic. I was like, yo, skip that. And then when it wasn't there at all, I was like, yo, what the hell do I do? Like, what do I do? And I love like my mother, my grandmother, that's my backbone. That's the air that I breathe. But as much as I saw compassion in women, I also saw enabling, where I saw them holding space for men that were toxic as hell. And I was like, yo, it took my mom 17 years to leave my father when it finally hit its climax. And I'm like, yo, you allowed him to maintain this space in your life, because it's not easy to walk away. And I applaud her for finding the strength to finally break loose, because so many women never make it and sometimes don't see the next day because they can't get out of it. Right. But then as a man, I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? And then into my relationships, I was like, yo, what does a healthy relationship look like? My grandmother and my grandfather, my mom's parents, are 96 and 93 years old. And when I look at their dynamic, I was like, I don't even want that. My grandpa was an angry old man. From the time I was young, he was just angry as hell. And my grandma, bubbly as hell. Like she loved everybody. She taking care of everything. And my grandpa's miserable. So I'm like, yo, I don't want that either. Like I legit was like, yo, where do you find the healthy relationships that you look to emulate? And when I looked to God, it was like, and I'm gonna be honest with you, my faith has been grounded. I thought I could have conversations with God, but then when I didn't hear him, I blamed God. And I'm like, yo, where you at? Where you at when I'm struggling? Where you at when I'm actually in prayer looking for answers? I can't hear you. And I don't have anyone to guide me. So what do I do? So now I go, he needed me to shut the hell up, and gratefully get into an environment where the noise was quieted, because my quiet time was with him. And I started to heal the things within, to realize it wasn't like I was put in an environment with my father to be super toxic, so that I could see how extremely negative it could be. So I knew what I didn't want to go. And to this point, like I've never laid hands on a woman. And to a philosophy we were talking about earlier, it's not because I'm a Superman. I know I've hurt women in other ways with being cold and distant, because I didn't know what love felt like. I didn't know what it looked like. I couldn't define it for myself because I had never seen it. So I had fairy tales, right? Like we grew up in the Disney generation. And I look at all these things and I'm like, oh, they always say like this is the beautiful story. We see the happily ever after, but we never saw the after. Right. The real work is the after. And I was like, well, what the hell is that supposed to look like? And so now I just approach life with like a shake and bottle mentality. Like if I give you a bottle of soda and I shake it up, I used to pop the top. And what happens when you pop the top? Your soda go everywhere. And that was me. Like if you angered me, I'm gonna let you know. You're gonna feel all this. But now what I've learned is that if you leave the top on, you let it settle, God will bring you a peace and you can maintain. Like I'd rather pour from a calmed cup. And that's the work that I'm doing. And my relationships have been indicative of the hurt I was trying to avoid giving to others. but I couldn't give love either. So it's been an interesting dynamic when it comes down to relationships.
Okay, I don't want to go too
Courtney
far.
was about to say something. I saw it all over his face, but go ahead, Sam.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go.
You sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So as the light bright of the group, so my mother is about king's complexion, and my dad is just as pale as I am. We Irish in a mug. So growing up without my father, last time I talked to my dad, I was 6. Last time I saw him, I was 4, I think. And then we got back in touch at 24. So I grew up without my dad, like no contact. My mother's Black. I grew up in an all-Black family, in an all-Black neighborhood, to an all-Black church, to a predominantly Black high school. So I stick out no matter what. I spent my entire childhood and most of my 20s trying to convince people that I was Black. And not, hey, yo, see me? I'm Black. Just so you know, if you ever say hi, not like that, but I'm saying like, if we interacted, I was ready to defend that I was Black. I carried a picture of my mama. Yeah, facts. I carried a picture of my mama and me in my wallet until I was like 26. And it's a straight 90s picture. My mom got hazel contacts, dookie braids, like, you know, she Black. Like this is right now Black. You feel me? And so, and I needed that. I needed to, no. You know, Quincy's my cousin. Yeah, for real, I'm Black. Like that's, you know, my family. And I spent all of this time. And it wasn't until my early 30s that I realized that I never had anything white to identify with, which is why I was so, like, I was trying to abstain from it as much as possible. Like, I can't get away from it. You know what I'm saying? But I hated when people were trying to tell me that I was something that I didn't identify with. And so I had like this, almost like this cognitive dissonance of like, yo, you're trying to break my understanding of myself to your image, but we don't see this the same way. And so as I got back in touch with my dad, and we're probably as close as we can ever get because we miss those bonding years. So we're as close as you and another older gentleman that you've met and the bond that y'all can create, but he wasn't a part of your pouring in those times of, you know, development and stuff. All that to say, I can only imagine, like, I see what it did for me not having somebody to identify with to help me embrace myself, even from a complexion perspective. But I can see that being universal across the board. If I don't have someone to identify with, to look to see myself in their face, to see myself in their posture, to see myself in the way that they carry themselves. Like my mom used to tell me, like, you have no idea how much like your dad you are. Like so many of the things that make you who you are, you get from him. That doesn't help because I can't see it. You know what I'm saying? And so as I've taken that into consideration, and my dad and I have a pretty good relationship now, and I've healed from all that, you know, all of that. I spent time in therapy dealing with childhood traumas and abandonment and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, my approach to my children is A, obviously to be very present, but B, to share myself with them as much as possible. Like, yo, this is who daddy is. This is what daddy likes to do. These are the things that daddy's naturally drawn to. And at the same time, give them the space to come into their own. And then if I see similarities, I'm like, oh, let's do that together. So you can identify with it as an adult. So you can see an image of what that looks like later on down the line. Like one of my sons, like I write music, and one of my sons, every time I'm in this room, like I got studio mics and stuff right here. Like every time he's like, Daddy, can I record something? I'm like, yeah, man, come on. So he'll hop in and I saw the frog sitting on a log. Like he just come in just trying to drop something. You know? But I love that. I love being able to cultivate that because it's something he sees his father doing. I don't care if he ever writes music, but the fact that he sees his daddy doing something, he wants to be a part of what his daddy is doing. So just having something to identify with, having someone to identify with, I think is so big. I love my mama. I always love my mama. I ride for my mama, my uncles, my auntie, but they not my daddy. There's a difference. There's something, I don't know, man. There's something divine about that lineage of what you come from and seeing yourself, you know, as an adult. And I think it was Marcus who was talking about his grandfather was angry. Like I learned something, man, and I'll end after this. When I got out of the Army, I started working at this energy corporation in the copy room, literally like ground level. And there was this old gentleman there named Mike. And Mike had just had a hip replacement. And he was a very handsome older dude, golfed all the time, was like on his last leg of retirement. Like he was retiring like next year. And I asked him, I was like, why is Mike so angry? Like he's the epitome of grumpy old man. And there was a gentleman who came up one day and he was like, I've known Mike since we were 20. He was a grumpy young man. And so I believe that grumpy old men were grumpy young men at this point. And it's just whatever their childhood consisted of, whatever they were never able to properly process, they just never worked through it. And so they learn coping mechanisms. And a lot of that time it's silence or alcohol or being withdrawn. And, you know, we look back and we like, our fathers didn't do enough. They were this, they were that. But man, we probably have no idea the stuff that they don't talk about that made them the way that they are. And so I'm grateful for platforms like this, for people like the doc who are on, for people who actually take the time to not only seek after, but become a person, to become a safe space where people can actually properly process the things that they go through, because ultimately that's all we'll end up doing, is passing this stuff down further and further. And we know what it was like. We know what we didn't like. We know what we learned to cope with, but that doesn't mean it was the best way for us to do it. We need to try to provide the best way for our children to grow up in a safe space, to become themselves and have proper identity with us and, you know, with the future that they see for themselves.
Yeah, that was great. And I don't know if I want to say my comment, but I will anyway. Just Disney in general, right? So we did grow up in a very Disney realm and it's a fairy tale and whatever. But if you actually sit and watch every single Disney movie, there's a lot of tragedy in Disney movies. There's always a parent that's missing. There's always a parent that was dead. There's always an evil stepmom. There's always some other narrative from Disney movies that we can learn. And that a lot of that came from Walt Disney's own, you know, turbulent childhood, right? But the part that we don't get or didn't always connect as children, and I think even as adults sometimes we miss with Disney, is we see the fairy tale because it can only be an hour and a half movie, right? But what we're missing is there was tragedy, and then there's moments of happiness and resolve, and then there's still going to be another moment of tragedy afterwards somewhere in that timeline, but we can't put all that in an hour and a half, right? We want to end it on a good note because it was so tragic leading up to whatever happened. And so I think a lot of the things that we lose, not us per se necessarily, but in general, we lose sight of is that in terms of like toxic parenting, and this mindset is if it's tragic, you just need to get over it. And a lot of what can switch that mindset and toxic parenting is embracing whatever that tragedy is, whatever that struggle is, and having actual conversations about it versus kind of dismissing it, rolling over it, or in the name of being, you know, the best person you can be, just be silent over it and not talk about it. And, you know, oh, well, they're just like that. They're just angry. They're just touched. No, they're not touched. They're a pedophile. Can we just call a spade and have conversations about it, please? Instead of just, oh, don't go sit on Uncle so-and-so's lap. No, call Uncle so-and-so out. Like, let's talk about the toxicness and call it out. And that's what's missing in a lot of the parenting and the generational messages that keep getting passed on generation to generation.
Absolutely. And I want to piggyback on that because I think it's valuable, and I got to get before King, because I also get to acknowledge him, right? Because in that space, like, he and I crossed paths while I was still at a very young age in life, and he was a young father. And again, God brings specific people into your life for specific reasons. And I watched him interact with kids, not from his hurt, but as a young man trying to navigate how to help children heal and grow while shouldering his hurt. And I was like, dang, that's dope. Because on the other side of it, outside of just Disney, I think about my childhood as a whole, and I had to go back and heal with my father, like similar to Courtney, like your job to be my dad, that opportunity has gone, but we can be friends. And so that's been a stretch in me, but that was my healing to take on, because then I realized you are a duplication of your grandfather and so on and so forth. But I also held you to a standard that was impossible for you to reach. You were supposed to be the Cliff Huxtables, right? The Uncle Phil's, like I was holding you to an imaginary standard that I looked for on TV. And I was like, that's what a real dad looked like. That's what a real dad respond like they didn't have flaws. But I'm just going to the polar opposite and being like, yo, why aren't you this? Instead, you that. And now I'm like, yo, let that man be who he is. And similar, like what Mike said, I have pity for you now because I go, oh, you weren't able to break the cycle, but I am. And now I have examples of the fathers in my life, like Shannon, who I'm close friends with, RJ. And I'm just like, oh, this is what it could look like. Right. And so it's arming me with the coping mechanism, the healing and the growth that I get to implement as a future father. But go ahead, King. Yo, I saw you quick on the trigger.
Yeah, I'm bubbling over here. I was like sitting here like simmering. First and foremost, let me acknowledge a few things. Sam, I appreciate that because I skipped over that. I just hit it and kept going about addressing it because Shani told me a situation and I went and addressed it. And enough people don't address it and call that person out. So I said it and then I just kept going. I was like, dang, I done put emphasis on that. So thank you for that. And thank all of y'all. By raise of hands, I got most of y'all who did not have their father in their household. And I saw Denzel, boom, boom, boom. All right. Because one thing that I realized, man, that was like, that had me bubbling over here, like I'm trying to be patient, right? And the thing was, I heard about the angry grandfathers. And then I seen about the absent fathers. And then I went back and thank God for my grandmother and partially knowing about my grandfather. A lot of the grandfathers went through segregation. They were getting shot with water hoses, getting bit by dogs, and couldn't be in the same, area eating with people. So a lot of people went through that. And then our parents went through mines went through gang banging and crack epidemic. So like, what I'm saying? So most fathers went through that era too as well. So when you start realizing that, it's like, man, you start realizing that's where a lot of absent people came, like a lot of times in there, or the hurt and the trauma, because that's what I needed to pinpoint. Why did it happen? And so when I had looked at the situation and to make it very clear before my grandma passed away, I did rename myself because I had to redefine and fix the situation. I'm actually named after a dude that is not even my father. And it was said to me earlier, but it was never clarified until just recent, like, within like the last year, what happened. And it just came down to people being young in high school. And my father came, found out that I was his, and but she was with somebody else and I got named after somebody else, to make a long story short. But when you start looking at things, you start identifying with situations. All I knew when I was growing up was a lot like y'all. I had anger. I was very upset because I'm like, all right, my mom not here. Why she don't want me? I said, I already don't got my dad, and he's gone. And in the whole situation, you never know what happens. So you're trying to go to these basketball games. You are looking at the Uncle Phil's and the Cliff Huxtables and stuff like that. And you're like, man, and you're focusing on that. But then what was great about my situation that was different from everybody else's is that I had a village that raised me. I had good, solid, and that was the balance that I needed. And with the toxic, I feel you need the good. So you can be able to weigh and define. Some people just get all toxic and never get to see the good situation. So now with my grandma renaming me and taking my grandfather's name, who actually raised me for majority of my life, and not him, my uncle and my aunt, I started realizing that's what I identify with. So that's what I am. So I'm a Stanford for life, regardless of the point. And that's when you start redefining the situations, because what came down after going down the generations to myself, I realized like, man, I was a parent doing the same generational curse, having a child in high school, which ultimately is Ray John. If anybody don't know Ray John, he was my first son. And then, so after that, and after losing him, I ended up getting Miko and then Inoki, and I ended up like, dang, man, I got like almost a whole starting five. I got like 4 kids, bro. And I'm like a young dude in my 20s with 4 kids. And I'm like, all I knew is that I'm not going to be that man. So I got to do everything possible to be there for them. And when you start realizing that you're being there for them, it still may not get the same result. Squad hit real deep. So, but you started realizing is that like my grandmother, who never had siblings, end up having a bunch of children, is because God gives you the things that you desire for in your heart, and he'll give you the knowledge. So all I did was just make sure that I was there for him. That's the first thing I could do, is that I learned from my grandfather, be consistent, provide for them, make sure you're there. Like, even if that's half the battle, if you can be there for your children. So I started seeing the change with inside even though people went through that. And my grandfather, he wasn't angry. He just was from New York. New York people just, you know what I'm saying, they'll cuss you out for no reason. And there goes Sam, you know what I'm saying? So, but you love them because they real, you know what I'm saying? They real. If they don't like you, F you. If they like you, they may say F you, you know what I'm saying? But it's still like, you know, the love, because they're going to cook, they're going to take care of you. Awesome people, right? That was my grandfather. And so really loved. And so when I started looking at that, it was like, man, cool. But to fast forward and let's go into a relationship. So my parenting things, I had to change that. And I had to just glean on what was good in life. I had to stop looking at that little speck that was wrong and negative in my life that could be toxic and start healing that within inside myself. Because so often I was looking for outside sources when I really just needed healing internally. So I was thankful for God doing that. I was thankful for my grandma always not letting me go outside unless I went to church, because at least let me found love. Because that's the first place I like. Besides my grandmother, she was the physical aspect of love. Church gave me love with my connection with God, not the people. Because of course we see the things that Marcus see in church, because people are broken oftentimes. They're in a hospital trying to get healed. So you can't focus on that. It's your personal relationship. And so when fast forward, I had kids and stuff and I got divorced, I started realizing inside myself, I needed to heal me, because I needed to start dating myself to find the things that I really wanted in life. Right? Because I wanted to make sure that not only did I not be toxic to my children, and I did not want them to feel the way I felt, I also wanted to make sure that my relationships was healthy, that I had with friends and stuff. And mention of which Mark is probably I say by far, probably one of my longest friends, because like either my other ones that I know, I don't even communicate, dead or in jail. So Marcus, since like 2001, when we was meeting at Cactus Park outside balling. Yeah, it's 2001, like right after the Diamondbacks won the series. That's the only way I remember it. And I moved out here. He was like the first person I moved when I moved out here. And certain people you connect with and you stay with when it's genuine and it's pure and there's no hidden agenda behind the scenes, you know what I'm saying? And that's why I'm truly thankful. And then Shannon's another one I met as well while I've been out here. And what I've realized in my relationship is the ones that are healthy stick and stay, and the ones that don't, either I'll cut or they'll fall off, because I never really have to cut them. Sometimes I do, but other times, if you just keep growing in yourself internally, they'll just fall off. You know what I'm saying? Naturally. And then I started realizing with the relationships, if it's family, if it's a romantic interest, when I started healing and working on myself, I attracted things that I wanted in life, and ultimately started removing the generational curse. And I'll say this last thing. I was talking to a song the other day, and I said, man, so oftentimes we're trying to look back at the generation before us, or even have a conversation with the generation before. I said, we got to let that one go. I said, it starts with us and it's going to move down. We're going to just make sure we heal our kids. I said, it's on us. And I said, we're the generation that's going to really ultimately cut all generational ties that we had in bondage, and heal the next generation of the leaders, which is going to be our children. And I'm ultimately excited about that, about what's going on.
That's imperative, man. Like, you got to look at it like this. I'll be real transparent with you. I had a conversation this morning, actually. I was telling somebody, I was like, you know, like, I don't really, a couple of weeks ago, I really felt like my walk with God wasn't on the quality level that it had been previously. And I started to think to myself, like, yo, I got to get back to this. I got to get back to that. And God was like, you don't got to get back to nothing. We start from here. You don't have to go back to a previous level of achievement, of magnitude, of effort, of whatever. No. Like, you can't take your love back to where it once was. You got to grow your love from where you are. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's the exact same thing we have to do with our children, with our interpersonal relationships. We got to go from right here, be introspective enough I think the sad part, and I think Dr. Sam could probably speak to this, but like the sad part is that most people are afraid to really be introspective because they have to face that stuff that they know really hurts. And they don't want to deal with that. They spent so long burying that stuff.
Don't preach, brother.
You know what I'm saying? You know how I do. So, you know, they just spent so long putting that stuff in the back that it's like, yo, I put that at the very, very back of the closet with the blanket over it on purpose. So now I don't even see the blanket. Like, now I just go in here and get all the other stuff I put in there. And it's like, nah, I need you to go pick that up. Excuse me, pick what up? Yeah, I need you to go pick that up. And do what with it? Hold it for a while. Oh, no, we not doing that. We not gonna sit here and hold on to the hurt stuff that I have learned to work around. You want me to hold that? Yeah, that's gonna make me, yeah, it is. I'm gonna be hurt. Yup, you are. But the thing you never did with it, you're going to do this time. You're going to properly process it. You're going to
Subscribe so you don't miss next week's video.
process it. You're going to assign roles for who was responsible for what. You're going to take it. You're going to own your part, and you're going to set that thing down and move on with your life. And you can finally go to the back of the closet again without fear of how, what's underneath that blanket or whatever. And it's so imperative that we start from where we are. And so King, I resonated strongly with that point that this is where those curses break. This is where we take a stand, essentially, not at the sake of sounding cliche and metaphorical.